Hi, my name is Katelyn S and my topic for this year's Kay Fellowship is comparing implicit bias against Asian Americans in Hawaii versus California. My mentor is Dr. Kristen Pauker, psychology professor at UH Manila. Yeah, okay. Oh. I would like to begin by thanking Papa Jack for creating this fellowship. It was truly a life-changing opportunity for me and helped me develop an interest in both psychology and also independent research. I cannot overstate my gratitude for this experience. It was just so amazing. So, what is implicit bias? Implicit bias, also known as unconscious bias, is a unconscious preference for one identity over another. We all have implicit biases, and they are highly shaped by both the culture we grow up in and the media that we consume. Our identities are made up of so many different parts, whether it's religion, nationality, ethnicity, age, gender, etc. There's so many facets that make up who we are as a person. For example, I am an Asian American girl, 17 years old, from Hawaii. I am a third generation Japanese and Chinese American. I am also bi and an atheist. Some of these things can be perceived by people when they first see my face, or even when they just read my name. But so much of it is much deeper, and it requires a much deeper understanding of someone that can't be just assumed based on surface level details. Yeah. So the part of our brains that are responsible for implicit biases are also responsible for pattern recognition, which is completely natural and also really important. It's the reason why we can probably read this sentence despite its many misspellings. Yeah, it's because of our ability to recognize patterns and make assumptions about these words that we can do this. The problems begin when we start to form assumptions about human beings in the same way, and that kind of assigns them stereotypes. Stereotypes can be defined as widely held or oversimplified images or ideas about groups of people. Unconscious bias becomes harmful when a wider group of people hold the same unconscious stereotypes about a different group of people. Like, this can lead to systemic racism. An example of this is some gifted and talented programs at schools can kind of become a form of like self-segregation when teachers recommend their white students at much higher rates than black students because of their unconscious preferences. And on a wider systemic level, this can lead to like huge disparities. Many of these stereotypes form because people are just better at processing faces that are more familiar to them. The same race effect is a researched phenomenon that people find it easier to differentiate faces from the same race as them. This is likely where the phrase, "they all look the same," comes from. Yeah. The perpetual foreigner stereotype casts Asian Americans as foreigners and not as true Americans. This is a common stereotype in America specifically. Studies have shown that Asian Americans are less likely to be hired for government jobs because of this stereotype. Our biases are also highly shaped by the media we consume. Studies have shown that a negative portrayal of Asian Americans in media can lead to a higher association of Asian Americans with foreigners. There's a study where we looked at implicit bias, like anti-Asian implicit bias, which has been declining in the past 10 years, but following a huge increase in anti-Asian rhetoric in conservative news outlets, that trend reversed and started to increase for the first time in a decade. The implicit American equals white effect is the main implicit bias that I'm studying. It's the effect that Asian Americans are less associated with the category of American than white Americans. Research has shown that this effect is less prominent in more ethnically diverse metropolitan areas, implying that maybe exposure to members of ethnic minorities may decrease implicit bias. For this study, I collected data from Hawaii and California. Hawaii is unique in that it's the one state where there's a higher Asian American population than Euro-American population, unlike the rest of the United States. Most of the data I collected from California were from towns such as Santa Rosa and Santa Barbara, California. Both towns had a Asian population of 3 to 5%, so much less than Hawaii. So that leads to my research question. Will the implicit American equals white effect be less prominent in Hawaii, where Asian Americans are the majority? Will they in fact have the opposite bias, associating Asian Americans with American and Euro-Americans with foreign? So I conducted my research using this tool called the Implicit Association Test, or IAT. It's the most widely used and validated tool for measuring implicit bias in academic research. It's what I use to collect my data. It kind of functions like a computer game. Images of faces or places or words will pop up on the screen, and participants sort them to different sides of the screen. And the kind of assumption is that if you find it easier to sort two types of images together, then there might be a bias present. It's kind of hard to understand. I'll elaborate more later. Yeah, the 4 demographic groups I studied were Asian American Hawaii residents, Euro American Hawaii residents, Asian American California residents, and Euro American California residents. So my hypothesis was that Hawaii residents of both ethnicities would have less of an anti-Asian implicit bias than California residents because of that higher population, you know? With the help of my mentor, Professor Parker, and her lab, I designed my own implicit association test using Harvard and tested and approved images of faces and landmarks. So these are some examples of the images I used. Here we have Asian American faces, Euro American faces, images of American landmarks, and images of foreign landmarks. So if it's easier to kind of sort Asian American faces with foreign landmarks and harder to sort them with American landmarks, kind of the assumption is maybe they have a bias against, like, maybe it's easier for them to associate Asian Americans with foreigners. Yeah, so I also added demographic questions to kind of, I asked participants what their state of residence is, their ethnicity, their age, and gender. So I collected my data. Some of it I collected in person, just by approaching strangers and asking them to complete my IAT on my laptop. I also sent a bunch of links to the IAT to people, so it's like email and in person. So I traveled to Santa Rosa, California to collect a lot of my data from California. Some of the places I collected data from include Santa Rosa Junior College and Enmanji Buddhist Temple. And in Hawaii, I collected a lot of my data from UH Manoa, but also like random coffee shops around. And yeah, it was really an experience to approach people and kind of ask them to take my test. In all, I collected enough usable data from 129 participants. Yeah. So how is implicit bias measured? When you take an IAT, the IAT spits out this number called a D-score, which is a numerical measure of implicit bias. The way I programmed my IAT, 0 kind of implies no bias. A negative score kind of means you associate Asians with foreign more, and a positive D-score would imply maybe you would associate Asians with American more and Euro-Americans with foreign more. So my hypothesis was that Hawaii residents would be more on the positive side of the scale, and California residents will maybe be more on the negative side of the scale. In actuality, there was an overall bias associating Asians with foreign and white people with American for all the demographic groups studied. Even Hawaii residents and Asian Americans shared this bias. But we see like kind of a larger range in these scores for California residents than Hawaii residents. We ran the data through a 2x2 between subjects ANOVA like using SPSS, to look at how ethnicity and location interact with D-score. We discovered that there was no statistically significant difference between locations, so no statistically significant difference between California and Hawaii. The p-value was 0.66, so pretty solidly not significant. However, there was a significant difference between ethnicities. Asian participants had a less strong bias against Asian Americans than white participants, which kind of, you can guess why that would be. It's their own ethnic group. Despite that, all of their means were all sub-zero. Yeah. Here we can see that another graph to kind of show comparing Asian Americans in California and Hawaii and Euro-Americans in California and Hawaii. White participants had a stronger overall bias than Asian participants, but biases were pretty similar between the states. That's not to say that there weren't individuals who had positive D-scores, but they were overwhelmed, but like the means for all four groups were all below zero. Yeah, okay. When observing the state by race by gender interaction, we see that East Asian California males are the only group of people with a slight mean positive D-score. Everyone else has a mean negative D-score. 0.21. Okay. I also observed that there was a negative correlation between age and D-score. Older participants tended to have stronger biases than younger participants of each demographic group. Younger participants maybe were more likely to be less biased. So why were Asian participants seemingly biased against themselves? My conclusion is that implicit biases can be held by anyone, regardless of ethnicity or location. In Hawaii, police killings often disproportionately affect Micronesians, Native Hawaiians, and African Americans. Could this be because of implicit bias? It's just an example of like the many ways implicit bias may affect life, you know? So in Hawaii is like not the multicultural paradise that a lot of people label it as. And the thing about implicit bias is that it's unconscious, so by definition, you're not aware of it, so it can really affect anyone. So I recommend to take time to reflect on biases, not necessarily relying on exposure alone to kind of protect you from developing these. Mindfulness is actually shown to help individuals lessen their implicit bias. And also many professions now require implicit bias training because we're learning more and more as time goes on that implicit bias is behind a lot of the systemic problems and disparities that we see everywhere. I would like to thank my mentor, Professor Kristen Parker, and her lab again for helping me throughout this whole project. It was truly life-changing for me. I have really developed a strong passion for and interest in social psychology, and I want to study in college. I want to major in psychology. Research has helped me grow in so many ways that I couldn't have imagined when I first sent in that application for the Kay Fellowship. I would also like to thank my teacher, Dr. Chan, for all of her support this summer. It was so I'm just so grateful. And also thank you to my Auntie Chucky and Uncle Ing for helping me collect data in California. Yeah, and also thank you to my friends and family for your support this summer. I feel like a lot of my friends and family kind of just mobilized to help me collect data. They sent emails to their friends and family members. It was such a huge help. So overall, I grew so much from this experience. An example of that being I overcame my initial hesitation to approach strangers to ask them to complete my survey. I think at the beginning I was really awkward about it, and a lot of people thought I was trying to sell them something. But I just learned to just go for it. And like I said, it really helped me develop my passions. I recommend to future K fellows to choose a topic that you're genuinely like really passionate about, because I'm just so happy that I did this, and like I've realized now that like this K Fellowship has been possibly like the highlight of my entire high school career. Yeah. So it really matters to like choose a topic that like kind of sets your soul on fire. Thank you so much. These are my references. Yeah. Thank you.